Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. This is Ed Salzberg, and I'm the Executive Director of the Security and Sustainability Forum. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the first webinar we're doing in a series on all about wildfires and sustainability. We're going to be talking about biomass in the forest, and that's the reason that we're having this session today. I'm pleased that Bill Brandt is going to be moderating that. He's the Director of Strategic Integration for LightWorks. And LightWorks is our host for this series. If you don't know the Security and Sustainability Forum, you can check us out at ssfworld.org. There's hundreds of educational webinars there, many of them with Arizona State University, and I'm really pleased for that relationship. Please take the exit survey at the end. It'll only take a second or two. We do have a question and seeking co-sponsors with ASU for this series, and there's a few other questions in there that are important to us about workshops and follow-on and other things that you would like to see here. The video will be ready a little bit later today, and you can download the couple of slides that we have in the GoToWebinar window. There's going to be additional ones from Zach Knight that I'll have to get to you after this session. And so with that, let me turn this over to Bill, who's going to kick us off on the session.
Ed, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to have everybody here this afternoon or this morning on our webinar on wildfire resilience, how we can basically turn that into a future where we're prepared and we have things that we can do. So I'm Bill Brandt, as Ed said, with Arizona State University's LightWorks, and I'm honored to help lead today's conversation, building a wildfire resilient future, markets, biomass, and partnerships. As we all know, wildfires are no longer seasonal. They're year-round. It's a national crisis. And while they've historically been seen as a Western issue, the risks now extend across regions and sectors, affecting everything from insurance markets to public health. Meeting this challenge requires integrated financial, ecological, and policy solutions. And wildfire risk is a shared risk, and addressing it demands shared accountability. Now, many of us know someone who's been directly impacted by fire. The Palisades and Los Angeles fires earlier this year underscored what we're all feeling. Somehow, fires behave differently now. The intensity, the speed, the unpredictability, it's a new reality. And whether it's driven by wind, drought, or broader climate shifts, the implications are clear. We need to act differently. At ASU, we're working on an initiative called Biomass to X, which focuses on turning forest waste into high-value products, such as biochar, clean fuels, and carbon credits. It's about aligning fire mitigation with economic development and community resilience. The idea is simple. If we can scale up forest thinning efforts and convert that biomass into something valuable, we not only reduce fire risk, but we generate jobs, diversify rural economies, and help meet carbon goals. Today's panel is designed to move beyond a general discussion. Our goal is to identify replicable models and investment-ready strategies that others can build on. So whether you're joining us from academia, local government, state government or federal, the private sector or a community group or a nonprofit, we invite you to consider where your role fits in this transition. I also want to share that just a few weeks ago, I had a chance to present this opportunity in Northern Arizona to some people at EarthX, which is an Earth Day celebration in Texas, run by Trammell Crow. And when Trammell's team heard about what we were doing, they decided to reshuffle their schedule so that they could make room for me to come on EarthX TV to be interviewed and talk about it. Now, that kind of interest signals what many of you already know, that there's real momentum building around these ideas. But momentum needs infrastructure, financial, technical, and political to carry it out and carry it forward. So that's why we're launching a series here, and this is the first. In future sessions, we'll dive into technology advances, market trends for forest products, and regional implementation strategies, and how policy and funding can better align to make this work. ASU also has a presence in Washington, and we intend to take the best ideas and your feedback to the federal level, because it's so important for all of us, no matter where we live in the US. So please use the Q&A in today's webinar. Your questions and your insights will help shape where this goes next. And let's kick off today's session. So I'll begin by introducing the panelists. Our first panelist is Jay Smith. Jay is Coconino County's Forest Restoration Director and has worked in the forest industry since graduating with a Bachelor of Science from Northern Arizona University in 1993. His background includes logging, sawmill operations, as well as his current role to accelerate forest restoration activities and to reduce the threat of catastrophic wildfire and post-wildfire flooding. So, Jay.
Thank you, Bill. Yeah, glad to be here. I wanted to kind of kick off with just giving an overview on what we're doing in Arizona. The Forest Restoration Initiative started in result of the 2002 Rodeo Chetasky fire, which burned about 468,000 acres. It was kind of Arizona's first mega fire. In response to that, there was a large coalition, collaborative effort to bring everybody together, industry, governments, state, federal, local, to nonprofits, to environmental groups, public, just get everybody together with a goal to treat 40 to 50,000 acres per year by thinning the forest to reduce this wildfire risk. Excuse me. So, you know, the southwestern ponderosa pine forest is a fire-adapted ecosystem. It needs fire, and about 90 years ago, the Forest Service, you know, started putting those fires out as soon as possible. They took that kind of out of the system, and there's some other grazing and other issues, and then logging with some of the logging the large diameter, leaving the small diameter, and then in the 90s, when environmentalists kind of went to the litigation side of things, you know, all logging stopped and thinning stopped on the Forest Service lands in Arizona specifically. So we went from a natural forest of 10 to 35 trees per acre, large trees per acre, to densities as high as 2,000 trees per acre, mostly small diameter now. So in this Forest Restoration Initiative, or 4FRI, the idea was to get in to thin those small diameters, and it was kind of a, if we build it, they will come. If we build those areas, the put out so many acres that industry will come, because we had lost most of our industry, forest industry. So they put out a 10-year stewardship contract, the longest stewardship contract at the time that the Forest Service had done, 300,000 acres. They chose a contractor. Unfortunately, the first contractor failed, and they novated that contract to a second contractor who, in the 9 years or so that they had the contract, was only able to complete 5%. They did about 15,000 acres of the 300,000. Again, the idea was contractors would bid enough to the timber would pay for the biomass removal that we would desired, and really that just never came to fruition as they were trying to build a whole new industry back. So once we lost that industry, trying to build it back, but you're trying to build it back while you're thinning 12-inch diameter at 4.5 feet above ground trees versus cutting, you know, 20 to 30-inch diameter old growth. And those trees just didn't have the value. That small diameter ponderosa pine mostly gets turned into pallet lumber in Arizona, and so it just didn't have an end value enough to pay to build this industry back, which was going to cost. Well, we've now determined several $100 million to get that industry really up to what it needs to do, and so the biomass removal just kind of limited that, because there was actually no value, negative value in the biomass as they tried to move it 150 miles from some areas of the project to the one entity that could consume that biomass. So what we realized, a subsidy was required to be able to do that. So this collaborative effort then started to really bring these parties together to get the buy-in to treat this many acres across the whole forest, four national forests, the Coconino, the Kaibab, the Tonto, and the Apache Sitgreaves. This largest ponderosa pine forest in the world, covering 2.4 million acres, and we're trying to build that. And so what we determined, what we found, yeah, you can see how the large kind of breadth that this area covers of northern Arizona, almost from middle of the state all the way to the eastern side of the state. And so without this work getting done, some of the work that the county, Coconino County, has done is we've determined just in small watersheds that have large impacts. If that watershed burns, the Upper Rio de Flag watershed just north of Flagstaff, if it burns and the post-fire flooding comes through, it's a $2.8 billion economic impact to the region. So, you know, we're looking at this cost-benefit analysis and this return on investment. So as we see the biomass building up as we try to treat acres, and we've affectionately called it the biomass bottleneck, that transportation cost of moving it 100+ miles just doesn't work. And so we're trying to find solutions to make that biomass end user as close to the forest as possible and as close to reduce that trucking cost. And we've kind of learned and understood now that the biomass energy cannot compete with coal, natural gas, or even wind and solar as far as the cost to produce that electron. So we're working through that. How do we reduce those costs? And so we understand it requires a subsidy. But if we start to look at the avoided cost and the ecosystem health benefits that we get, the equation becomes much better. But that's a hard thing to get people to understand. We've done some studies. Northern Arizona University Ecological Restoration Institute just recently did a study that showed a 600% return on investment on treating southwestern dry conifer forests. So basically says for every you get a $7 return for every $1 you spend on forest restoration treatments. And for that, the Coconino County Flood Control District has invested over $11 million in forest restoration, just trying to avoid the forest burning and then having those subsequent post-fire floods. We've also learned just from the experience of the fires that we've had in dealing with the pipeline fire of 2022, 20,000 acre fire, and we've spent over $100 million in post-fire flood mitigation. You know, those costs can be 20 times greater to react to the fire and the post-fire flooding than what it would cost to just treat the forest and reduce that wildfire risk. So we've determined as a county and as taxpayers in our communities that we're willing to put those dollars to use on federal lands to be able to prevent those catastrophic wildfires and then the things that come after them, especially the post-fire flooding. So Ed, I think you've got a couple of videos that demonstrates what we've dealt with. The first one is of, well, I'll let you show it, then I'll talk a little bit about each video after you show them.
All right, the first one is the flooding video. So let me get that up and get it running.
Fire, the first major rain event, monsoon event that we had after the fire, those boulders that are coming down are coming from 6-7 miles away. But it is coming down now and getting into the neighborhood. So it's coming off of federal land that burned and flowing down into the neighborhoods. And so that's where the $100 million of mitigation work that we've put into this post fire to try to mitigate that work. Next video, Ed.
Yeah.
This is the third warning now that we've gotten just since the rain has started coming down. Here it comes. It starts slowly. Water's going to breach on the corners to the very top.
What's going through your mind right now?
It's terrifying. It happens. There's the fourth time that this has come through, and every time it's worse. We rush home to try to man pumps and rebuild walls where the water's breaching. It's terrifying, and it's going to happen again and again and again until something is done.
I'm just like anxious. The silt went all the way back into our backyard.
Constant rain like occurred last summer where it was just so much water that nobody could handle it.
10 months ago to the date.
Came in the front door, flooded the living room.
Just a mess. You know, nobody wants to live on a street like this.
You know, the house is worth zero. So.
I mean, this was your life.
But there's, there's many homes. I'm not the only one.
I mean, I'm willing to take money out of my pocket and build this house up higher and make it affordable housing for people to come live in. You know, they need that in the city. I understand. But until they fix whatever's causing this, why bother?
And all the water had to come down off the mountain. And we watched it go first under our driveway and then over the top and erode things away and all that. It was especially difficult. And at one point you figure, you know, what are we supposed to do to keep up with all of this?
The wildfire and post-wildfire flooding are the top two public safety threats in here in Coconino County. Really dealt with a lot that lived in this area, of course, to make sure that people are safe. And that, you know, they're not their homes aren't threatened, wildlife isn't threatened, and these are sacred places too for Native Americans. And we like to, you know, be able to address that so, you know, we don't have to go through the same thing again.
Great. So that is all. The majority of that first part of the video was post-museum fire, which was less than 3,000 acres of fire, and you know, we had 2 years of really no monsoon rains. And so people thought, you know, why do we put all these sandbags out? And then bam, we get the rain and we get the flood. And, you know, those are the things that we're learning now, create even PTSD in people as we send out alerts for potential floods. So that's the end result if we don't do anything about managing these forests. And a big part of managing the forest is being able to get the biomass out. And so, you know, the county, we reached out with ASU to say, we need help. We need to find solutions to this problem. And where Bill came up with the biomass to X, let's find a way to deal with this biomass. So thanks a lot, Bill. Appreciate it.
Hey, Jay, thank you so much for that. And we're watching the questions, you know, come through. So please keep putting them in there, and Ed and I will make sure that we weave them into the discussion that we're going to have with Jay and others. So thanks, Jay, for setting the scene. Investments needed. We have to figure out how to do it. It's a community agenda, and that's the purpose of this group is helping us build that momentum to making it happen. So our next speaker is Mark Adams, who is at the Flagstaff Fire Department. He's a wildfire risk specialist, and he works closely with community members to prepare for wildfires. Adam is the superintendent of the hotshot crew and was on the scene of both the tunnel fire and the pipeline fire in the summer of 2022. So Adam.
Mark.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate you guys inviting me here. That video always gets me because I was actually at that house that day helping to put sandbags on in that house. So extensive flooding. It was terrible for those people and still is to this day. And like Jay said, that was less than a 3,000 acre footprint, and probably only about 900 or 1,000 acres was in a high severity, you know, burned at a high severity on a steep slope, and that's the result of that. So it doesn't take much. to create massive flooding like that. Like Bill said, my background right now, I'm a wildland risk reduction specialist, so I spend a lot of time with people preparing themselves, trying to get them ready for a potential wildfire in their backyard or on their property. Prior to that, I was with the Forest Service and I was a hotshot for 24 years. So I've seen the results over that career of the benefits of forest thinning before the fire happens. Like Jay mentioned, we have in the Ponderosa pine forest surrounding Flagstaff, we have a stem problem. We have somewhere in some parts of the forest, thousands of stems per acre. Why do we have that? Because we're so good at fire suppression for so long. We've altered the natural state of the forest that's around all our communities by just the great suppression that we've done for the past 100 years. Sure, we have a few that get away, but 99.1% or something like that, we put out before anybody even knows about it. And the result of that is overgrown forests to the point where something needs to be done. So I've seen firsthand traveling around the country, proactive communities like Flagstaff, where we've had treatments done over the past 30 years. And the benefits of those treatments have been immeasurable. In the last, Jay had showed that photo of the museum fire. That was one of the fires that wasn't in a treated area. It's in a very steep location. It actually, I take that back. It had started treatments in it, but it wasn't complete. They hadn't pulled out all that biomass that they started cutting. So that could have been part of the problem there, but it was in process. The city identified the need years back and established a bond that pushed the forest to thin the acres up on the Dry Lake Hills north of town and clean up the watershed a little bit. And that fire happened during that implementation. But prior to that, we've had extensive treatments on the south end of Flagstaff, where we have our winds typically come from the southwest, so that's where our fire threat is typically seen. We're going to see a large fire happen in southwest of town and come towards town, and the forest around town and the state resources have done extensive thinning, and it showed the benefits when we had the slide fire in 2000. I think that was 2014. We had the slide fire that happened in Oak Creek Canyon, south of town, and ran up the canyon. Was, there were evacuations in place. People were pretty spooled up, and it hit we knew as firefighters, I was a hotshot at the time. We knew coming in that once it hits the top, it's going to hit all that treatment that's been done over the last 20, 30 years. And we're going to be able to get in there. We're going to be able to find a good place, a good safe place for us to stop that fire. And it's not going to require a whole lot of work because the work had been done over the last 20 to 30 years. The Raphael fire, 2 or 3 years ago, same scenario, came up out of Sycamore Canyon, which is southwest of town. Had people in evacuation orders. It was a threat to Flagstaff, but all the firefighters on the ground, all of us operational people, we knew we had opportunities once it came out of that canyon and hit the treated areas. There was tons of opportunities for us to stop it, and it wasn't putting us at risk to do so, and things went great. Some of the challenges, we faced when we're trying to stop fires in front of communities is that when we're out in the forest, we can pick ridges. We have room to move around. We have room to stop these fires. We could pick the right place at the right time to do things. When we're backed up against the wall in front of a community, that time and space is shortened big time. And when I get to a community that hasn't done any proactive work ahead of time, it really is difficult for the responders to do anything to protect that community. We essentially have to go in and log and prep that area on the fly ahead of time, and our time and space is crunched big time. So having all these treatments done well ahead of time and in place just makes a huge difference. And I know the city of Flagstaff has benefited from that extensively. Some fire behavior you can see in different treated areas. If you have a treated area, you can get in there with a couple people and essentially put it out with your boot heel. Just scrape away the ground fuels with your boot heel in a treated area with not too many folks. In an untreated area, you're going to get flame lengths 10, 40 feet high in places, and you have to back off. You can't get people close to that. So that poses challenges, and it increases the cost, and it increases the amount of exposure for all the responders that are responding to that fire. Case in point, a couple years ago, we had 2 fires, each a day apart, each on red flag days. And the first fire was called the Mars fire. It was in a treated area right outside of town. One engine was able to respond to that and put that fire out at a 1/4 acre, required no extra help, and it was a done deal. The very next day, same conditions, same weather conditions, different fuel type. It was still ponderosa pine, but it was untreated ponderosa pine south of town. That required 4 engines, a dozer to respond, and a type 2 helicopter. So you can see right there, perfect example of what a treated area and an untreated area will do when you're trying to suppress a fire. So those things are, looking at the grander landscape scale, some areas that we concentrate on. The other challenges we have in protecting the WUI is when we get off of the public land and onto the private property. And that's where I come in and I go out and I meet with people that have private property on the outskirts of town, and I try to get them educated on what a healthy ponderosa pine stand looks like, how they can treat their land, and how they need to manage their land over time. Because if you own a couple acres of ponderosa pine, if you own any forested area, you're now a land manager, and you need to manage that land. You can't just sit back and not do anything. So I help to administer grants, offer them education on how they can then protect their home. And that extends beyond the forest, and it gets into the home, things that they can harden their home with, building materials, vents that lead into the attic, things of that nature to protect the structure itself. All these things need to come into play if we're talking about protecting our communities and making it easier for the first responders that are coming to save the day, I guess. I think that's all I'm gonna share, and I'll be available for questions later.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. Hey, Mark, can you just say one thing about what a healthy ponderosa forest looks like? Because for some of us who don't know, we like the idea of healthy, but we're not sure what that means.
Sure. So Jay could probably speak to this a little bit better, but essentially, in the simplest terms, a healthy ponderosa pine forest, back in pre-settlement days, a horse and carriage would be able to move across the forest without any kind of problems. There would just be a few large trees here and there. They'd be able to move across the landscape. That's not what we have today. We have somewhere like 200, 300, up to 1,000 stems per acre, trees per acre, and we call them dog hair thickets. You can't move through those. You can't. Right. You have to walk around them. You have to find your way around them. So a healthy forest would be very large, fire resilient trees, and then spacing in between those trees with mixed age classes. Maybe there's a little group of 10, 12 trees that are tightly, packed together, but then there's space around those trees and you can move around, and there's different age classes. What we have with fire suppression is fires used to move across the landscape every 2 to 10 years in a ponderosa pine forest, and it would naturally thin out the forest. So without fire to naturally thin out that new growth that comes in, there's areas of the forest now where we've had new growth where it's, you know, knee high, but it's a carpet. It is an absolute carpet of ponderosa pine, and that's in the absence of fire. That's what happens.
Okay, great. Well, that's super helpful. Basically, so everybody can say, hey, if I have a properly managed forest, then I can ride my mountain bike or drive my buggy all the way across it. There's open areas of grass with some very, very large trees, and that grass burns and keeps the thickets from growing. And
Absolutely.
So the thinning operation that Jay talked about earlier is just that. So thanks for that clarification, because I think that'll help people understand what you guys are talking about. So appreciate that. Okay, great.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. So our next speaker is Marcus Osborne. He's a principal at Kutok Rock LLP, and he's had 30 years of experience in government affairs with a focus on insurance, regulatory reform, and environmental policy. He has represented clients before the Arizona legislature and executive agencies, including work on air quality, infrastructure finance, and insurance regulation. He's also advised on legislation affecting wildfire risk, emergency services, and the insurance implications of natural disasters. And we've all heard stories about people losing their insurance or their insurance prices going way up. So for many people who live in some of these areas, this is like a really important problem because it affects their budget as well as their homes. So, Marcus.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm sure all of you watching the podcast didn't think there was going to be any insurance, but unfortunately, you got to have a talk about insurance. But you know, I think insurance is at really the crossroads of forest health and climate change, and we're having, as an industry, having to adapt very quickly to a new normal. One of the things that you'll see throughout the West is a hardening of the insurance market in the WUI areas in particular. It used to be back in the day where if there was a wildfire, the urban communities or the WUI communities could be protected because the fires weren't as intense or as extreme, and those things are changes. I mean, who would have envisioned 30 years ago a major fire in downtown LA with the amount of magnitude? One of the things, and we always talk in this area about the cost benefit, insurance is a very good measure of cost and risk benefit. If there's one thing that the insurance industry is particularly good about, is figuring out how to cost and model risk and then pass those costs on so that in a dependable manner. And what you're seeing now in the WUI areas throughout the West, and this is not just in Arizona or California, but you're seeing it in Idaho, Colorado, throughout the West, is the insurance industry is struggling with a combination of factors. The first factor is we're trying to understand the new normal in terms of fire risk and what that means for premiums, what that means for exposure, and then how do insurance companies balance their portfolio of risk to be sustainable over time. Do we need to reduce the amount of homes that we cover, businesses in one area, and diversify? So what you're seeing, unfortunately, in the market right now is homeowners in commercial insurance in these WUI areas are becoming more and more challenging to get as companies reduce their risk profile until they get a better understanding of what is going on in those communities. And so now I always look, and folks want to talk about, you know, Florida used to have a fairly significant insurance crisis, and it's still a very taxed insurance environment, but it took a number of years, and the insurance industry was finally able to realize how frequent hurricanes were happening, how much premium we needed to charge, and the kind of facilities or community hardening that needed to take place to come back into the market. And you're starting to see a restoration of the insurance market in Florida, where 5-10 years ago, it was really at a critical component. What we're seeing in terms of public policy in this area is some fairly unique partnerships are starting to form, or conversations. It used to be that the forest health folks, the land managers would sit and do their work over here, and insurance departments and that part would do their work over here, and the two never crossed. And what you're now seeing is much more cross-agency, cross-industry dialogue and work as states are starting to look at, okay, where am I having my biggest challenges with forest health and fire risk? Where am I seeing the biggest challenges with insurance availability? And how do we layer up insurance with forest health, and then combine solutions that not only will make the communities more resilient, but will also help to bring back the industry in a sustainable and affordable manner. And that's really been the focus. For example, right now, the Department of Financial Institutions, Insurance and Financial Institutions in Arizona has a working group where the state forester participates, insurance companies, local land managers, fire departments, all focused around how to make insurance more affordable. But the core part of that is, what are the policy implications that forestry and others need to do? What activities do communities need to do to harden those communities? And one of the things I'm most excited about, where I think is going to evolve out of Arizona, is this idea that we're going to start taking insurance availability data with local fire risk data, have community-specific dialogues, and come up with solutions that will make the communities more resilient to fire risk, with the ultimate goal of protecting the communities and at the same time creating a more affordable insurance market. One of the things that you'll see in the industry currently is we are investing significantly in modeling and understanding how fires act, react, and then what are those implications for insurance costs and resiliency. So it's very valuable information. And one of the things that insurers are particularly good about is predicting risk, and that can be very useful data and information for communities as we can predict fire risk and working with our local governments. The second area that I would really like to highlight that the industry, insurance industry is focusing on, is really getting into the resiliency standards for homes and businesses. And the industry created their own nonprofit, the Institute for Business and Home Safety, and their focus is creating new building code standards that are focused on resiliency, whether it's hurricanes, high wind events, or wildfires. And they've invested heavily to understand what building materials, what designs, what community activities are the most impactful in preventing or mitigating wildfires. And I think what you're going to see is a rollout in a number of communities where you'll see greatly enhanced fire mitigation standards for homes, retrofitting of homes, moving away from wood shingled roofs in woody areas to metal roofs, all the kinds of things that the data has really showed that if you make these investments, homes that are designed to be fire resilient are far more resilient than homes that have wood fences or don't have defensible space. and the data is very clear on that. So that's part of it. So everyone says, well, what can I do about my home and my business, and why can't I get insurance? Well, the second piece of that is, what is the community doing? Because the interesting thing about, if your neighbor is not engaging in the same activities, they're not only a risk for insurance loss, but they're also a primary source of fuel. And so the industry is looking more aggressively at a community approach to see, are these communities doing the maximum they can to prevent the great resiliency, forest thinning, and having the proper ordinances. So that's going to be a real interesting kind of dynamic that I think we're going to see play out in the West, is more building codes, more partnerships between the industry, local governments, really with this idea of how do we make the communities more resilient, but at the same time try to bring back the insurance market in some of these really stressed areas. And so I think that's kind of some of the things that I would like to highlight. You know, I always tell people we're kind of at that first part of that. The industry is trying to assess what the new normal is. We're trying to adjust premiums to reflect that new normal, and then come up with strategies for mitigation. And the next several years are going to be, I would say, a little bit rocky in terms of that implementation. But if we're all committed to it over time, we'll end up with more resilient communities. And I think that's a real positive. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or participate in the group discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. That was really, really good. And I see a lot of questions coming in, and Ed and I are going through those questions, and we'll make sure that we get an opportunity to have participants talk about this. And what I want to say is that we've started with, I'm going to say, what we've been trying to do, the fact that it's difficult to bring back a logging industry that disappeared 30 years ago to do forest thinning, which is what we need in order to do this. But yet, as Marcus was saying, insurance companies are now working on modeling, working out with communities, and that then leads to, I'm going to say, financial support for these activities, because if the capital markets could do it, they would have done it already. And so what we're talking about is, how do we as communities build that kind of trust, build these kinds of mechanisms, and do the things that we're going to need to do. So with that, I want to turn this over to Zach Knight, who's co-founder and CEO of Blue Forest, where he leads the development of innovative climate finance tools. And the Forest Resilience Bond is one of these, to fund proactive forest restoration. So with a background in financial engineering and experience in structured finance, he focuses on mobilizing private capital for environmental solutions that address wildfire risk and watershed health. So Zach, thank you.
Great, it's great to be here. If you could share that screen sharing ability, that would be great. And I'm glad folks are going to stick around after hearing about insurance to then also listen to finance, which I know can be tough sometimes. Well, it is great to be on this webinar. Thank you so much for having me and for this opportunity. My name is Zach Knight. I'm one of the co-founders and serve as CEO for Blue Forest. And during my talk, I'm going to quickly introduce you to Blue Forest, the Forest Resilience Bond, as well as the California Wildfire Innovation Fund. And what you're going to hear thematically through this talk is really, how do we use public-private partnerships and investment to help meet state, federal, and local goals around pace and scale of forest health treatments that we've been talking about today. And really thinking about how this investment can help grow the restoration economy and build capacity at the community level, which is really important to us at Blue Forest. So Blue Forest is a nonprofit organization, and we focus on using conservation finance to restore ecosystems and protect communities. And we do this using these three things you see here: science, finance, and collaboration, to bring groups together, understand all of the benefits of a healthy forest, and then to support the implementation of the collaborative priorities where we work. Blue Forest is 10 years old and has been partnering with the U.S. Forest Service since our inception. And we co-developed a public-private partnership called the Forest Resilience Bond, which I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides. This has grown to support more than half a dozen projects in multiple regions across 3 different states. And while most of our focus is on public lands, we recently started supporting watershed restoration on private lands through a partnership with Pheasants Forever. So I think it's always good to start with what fire risk looks like, not just in Arizona, but really across the Western US. And this represents about 58 million acres that are at significant risk. And depending on who you talk to and where you get your quotes from, that could be $50 billion in needed funding. It could be double that or substantially more. And I think a lot of what you hear homes at risk, like what we saw in that video. You sometimes think about the long-term health risks associated with breathing in wildfire smoke. It doesn't just impact our first responders. It impacts a lot of communities that are less, that are disadvantaged in certain ways as well. But what often gets missed is the water component of this. 60 million people depend on national forest system lands for their water supply. Where we are in California, we get 65% of our developed water supply from the Sierra Nevada region right there. And actually the snowpack on a good year holds more water than all the reservoirs in the state of California combined. So when we talk about restoring forests, we should really be thinking about this as natural infrastructure and thus something that we can. So the Forest Resilience Bond, as I mentioned, was developed in partnership with the U.S. Well, jumping into this here, so as I was mentioning, the Forest Resilience Bond was developed in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service, the World Resources Institute, and the National Forest Foundation, which is the congressionally chartered nonprofit partner to the U.S. Forest Service. So we're really doing 2 things here. First, we're connecting new funding sources with restoration projects that are already state or local priorities. And that can be bringing in dollars from the federal level, state level, municipal level, working with water and electric utilities or flood control districts, or even corporates in certain cases, and really modeling out and calling out those benefits, valuing them, and then actually engaging those groups and getting them to put money into these projects. The next thing we do is actually finance those commitments so that all the money is available up front to that implementation partner so that this work can happen faster, because as we all know, the wildfire crisis is a problem of immediacy. Taking you all through a flow of funds here, we'd raise money from investors, which could include insurance companies, and I'll come back to that, but also private foundations and groups like that. And they'll put money into a forest resilience fund, which is stood up for a specific project or a specific watershed. And part of that is to be transparent for investors, but for our utility partners or flood control partners, they want to make sure if we're taking this money in California that it's not going to some project that we're doing in Oregon or Washington as well. So we then take that money and we lend it at a 0% interest rate, and then we grant it as well to the implementation partners like the National Forest Foundation that I mentioned, who are then our general contractors that manage these restoration activities. We monitor the benefits, we report those back to the beneficiaries, they make their payments to the Forest Resilience Fund, and investors are repaid with a modest return. So in the end, it really does 2 things. First, it helps bring new funding to projects from additional groups who benefit from a priority plan project. The second piece is providing financing to that chosen implementation partner, again, such as the National Forest Foundation, who serves as sort of a general contractor that hire all the various crews to complete the elements of the project. So this is an overview of our active and completed projects, and excitingly, we have a few more to announce in Northern California, up in this area, coming right here. So really excited to share this, and you can see where we work does not at the moment include Arizona, but we're looking to continue to expand beyond what's Region 5 and Region 6 for the Forest Service. So I thought it would be good to go through an initial case study here. These were our first 2 projects we ever did with the Forest Service at Blue Forest, also with National Forest Foundation, as I mentioned before. And this is on the Tahoe National Forest, just a little bit north and west of Lake Tahoe in California. So we started back in 2018 with this first Yuba 1 Forest Resilience Bond, about a 15,000 acre planting area, about 4,000 acres of treatment, $4 million needed for that project. And it did include a small timber sale as well. We were able to take that project, which had a 12-year time horizon, and condense it down into 4 years. We brought almost every single dollar from outside parties like state agencies and water and electric utilities to support the project. And actually, one of the things I think I'm most proud about is that this is an area that didn't have an existing forest collaborative or coalition. So one of those, led by local partners, sort of came out of these discussions and this initial project as well. And catalyzing the North Yuba Forest Partnership is something that I'm incredibly proud of here. What's interesting, though, is that it took about 3 years to get this first project together, and it's relatively small, and it goes back to this idea of random acts of conservation that we've seen for a long time. That took 3 years to get that project together, but with the same partners and the same contracts and a lot of the same investors, same investment vehicle, we were able to stand up this much larger project in about 6 to 8 months. That's not including the time for the NEPA, so I don't want to say that. That took a good 2 years. But the point is, once we've done one of these in any watershed, it's much easier to replicate it and go again and again. And in fact, this group is getting ready for another 50,000 acre chunk of implementation here in the coming 2 years that will also support in this same way. So from that perspective, it's really exciting, and we could see how this would support local economies and build demand. But we've also run into some of the challenges of we're starting to hit that limit of how many contractors in the area that can respond to this. Are they using new and efficient equipment when they're out in the field? And what do we do with all the woody biomass? These projects are generating somewhere on the order of 100,000 green tons per year. It's pretty large scale. So what do we do with all that material, and are there infrastructure and outlets? And as it turns out, in California, there really weren't. We have a logging industry that's been declining, a wood products industry that's been declining, with about a third of the wood products facilities that we had, say, 30 or 40 years ago here in the state of California. So this challenge actually becomes an associated opportunity, and this caused us to launch Blue Forest Asset Management. Our goals are really connecting investors to private investment opportunities and to provide real value to those companies we're investing in, not just by providing capital, but by connecting the dots, providing technical assistance, and doing things of that nature. And so we've been at it for a few years, and we realized there's not many investors and there's not many banks that operate in this space. So if you're a licensed timber operator or you're trying to start a wood products business, there's not many people you can go to that are capital providers. So we've realized that there's this real need to build restoration economy investors. And one place that we think it really makes sense to start is with groups like insurance companies that uniquely benefit from making, say, a market rate investment in restoration economy, wood products, service providers, and also may reduce the risk to their underwriting portfolio or allow more policies to be written profitably in the future. So that's something we've been really interested in at Blue Forest as well. This led to our first fund strategy, the California Wildfire Innovation Fund, and this is a 10-year closed-end $50 million fund that we launched with an insurance company. That's AAA's Northern California affiliate, and actually the infrastructure bank right here in the state of California. As the name says, this is just focused on California right now based on who our investors are, but it's really importantly focusing on both competitive market rate financial returns along with reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfire. And just as I called out on the last slide, if you look at the investments here, we're talking about investing in that forestry value chain, harvesting, hauling, processing to utilization. And we think about it through a theory of change. Right now, we have a wildfire crisis. If we can deploy capital into the restoration economy and the services businesses, that's going to allow more of this work to happen. It's going to create more demand for wood fiber. Pace and scale will accelerate. You're going to get healthier forests and a lower risk of catastrophic wildfire. You're also going to boost rural economies if you're doing this work and this investing at the community scale, which is how we look at it at Blue Forest. My last slide here is talks a little bit more about this strategy and what we're trying to invest in. So again, really going across that value chain from investing in contractor companies, licensed timber operators, providing equipment financing where banks or seller financing is not available. We're looking at wood products as well as biochar, bioenergy, biofuels, et cetera, as well as some forest and climate tech, though that's not entirely our focus. And to invest in this space, it's pretty obvious that you need lots of different types of capital. So instead of setting this up as a venture capital fund or a private equity fund, we set up a structure that allows us to deploy both debt and equity capital, whether that's a senior loan, working capital loan, mezzanine debt, or structured equity investments. And our typical investment side, again, because we're sort of looking at community scale businesses, will be in the $2 to $5 million range, which means we'd love to have other investors join us in these investments as we try to build the field of restoration economy investors here. So again, this is just focused in California at the moment, but I think this is something we'd be really excited to broaden and make it national in scope, because we see this need for investment across a much broader landscape. So with that, I will wrap up my slides and stop sharing my screen here.
Next slide's got a little cut off there. I'll get them out to everyone, and I'll actually fix the video so that the recording has them clear.
Okay, well, now we're at the exciting part of the panel where we all get to talk to each other. So Ed, do we have everybody's video on?
Actually, if you would all turn your videos on now. Some of you noticed that Marcus was not online, his video is not working, but he can still pitch in on the discussion.
So looking at the questions, I think there's some questions about, so let's just go back and talk about what forest restoration means. It doesn't mean clear cutting the forest and turning it to, sort of pasture land. It means something a lot different. And then let's just go back and review, because we've lost a lot of our timber industry, what it takes to build it back up, because those losses were economic to begin with, and then how we can actually think about, what the package looks like that we put together. So maybe Jay, if I could ask you to sort of kick it off and just level set us on forest restoration in Arizona and the West. I mean, that's your specialty. So if we could start there, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So especially in the ponderosa pine forest of Arizona, when we came back together as a collaborative and we started talking with industry, with environmental groups, with everybody, we all focused around not cutting the old growth trees, that we need to keep those for their ecosystem, desires that they have for all the different species and different things. So we focused on trees 18 inches in diameter, breast height, 4.5 feet above ground and below. So when they go through and they look at these, as Mark mentioned earlier, we used to have a forest that had these groupy, clumpy, we call it, these groups of large diameter trees with interspace in between of grasslands. And we want to get back to maybe a closer model, maybe not exactly that, but closer model of that, to allow these fires to stay on the ground and utilize fire then in a prescribed fire manner to manage the work that we're doing now. So we're cutting on average diameter 12-inch trees. And that is the problem, but it's also the solution. The problem is they have no value. The solution is those are the ones that allow the fires to get up in the canopy, and then we have the catastrophic wildfire. So that's what we're looking for, is these groups of trees out there now, back with that interspace in between. What we want, our desired condition is a fire comes through, starts by lightning, which is what most of our fires start for in the Southwest forest. Starts with lightning, the fire kind of goes through, burns up grasses, kills some of the smaller pine trees that are growing up, and it maintains itself to some degree. But it takes industry to get us to that point, and we're a couple million acres behind right now in Arizona. So we're trying to get the industry in place to be able to do the work to get us back from having, wildfires that cost billions of dollars to deal with.
Yeah. So Jay, can I go down to Lowe's or any garden center and buy some of this equipment, or is it pretty expensive?
So you're not going to buy the equipment that we need. We just had the largest investment in forest industry with a new sawmill in the Flagstaff area that put over $300 million into this investment to build one of the highest production mills that we've seen ever in the Southwest. And so no, this is highly technical. It's high production type sawmills for specific for small diameter logs. And what else you won't be able to get at Lowe's is the lumber that comes off those logs, because that's the problem, is they don't make a 2x4 that's structurally sound because there's too many limbs on our trees. So the stuff you buy from Amazon will come around the country on a pallet that's made from wood in Arizona. And that's the other part of the problem that we have that requires the investments that Zach was talking about, is that we in a sense have to pay to get the wood out of the forest so that we can not have the wildfires that we're experiencing.
Right, that's really, really helpful. And then, you know, essentially once you've done the forest thinning, and that is what's required. So when Mark says, hey, you know, the fire's coming up Oak Creek Canyon, we know we can defend it. That's what you need, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the only way we've been able to get the industry to invest those hundreds of millions of dollars is to see that the Forest Service and the federal government is supporting this work happening and paying to get these trees removed from the forest, knowing that if they remove the forest, thin the forest now, get it back to a more fire resilient state, then they're not spending billions of dollars on wildfire response. So, you know, getting that set in place and keeping that funding coming on the front end is what gave the confidence to the investors to say, we'll put $200 million into this project.
Okay.
Bill, could I ask a quick, I don't want to jump in, just follow question. I want to put a period on this question about whether this is the right way to go or not. So Jay, in that 100 million acres, or the large acres that you're talking about that we're behind, where was fire suppression used there? And the situation is that because of that, these forests are overgrown. And if that had not been the case, we'd have healthy forests in those areas.
Correct. We, you know, as Mark and I both mentioned, 100 years ago, the Forest Service had a policy of put the fire out by 10 o'clock the next morning. And by doing so, we, in a sense, started the problem. By now, when you don't allow the fire to go through the forest and burn that forest floor and kill the saplings that are coming up, those saplings just grow up in thickets, and now you get the fuel ladder that allows the fire to get into the old growth canopies, and then you can't stop the fire from moving.
Right. So we're not talking about thinning forests that are in natural equilibrium.
No, very unnatural state.
Out of equilibrium because of fire suppression.
Correct.
Okay.
So Mark,
I'll just provide a little context to that. There's a district south of Flagstaff, the Mogollon Rim District, where they haven't been doing a lot of fry thinning. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but so far there hasn't been a big focus with the fry thinning down there. But for the last, I'd say 20, 25 years, this is a district that doesn't have a lot of communities around it. It's kind of in the back 40. They've taken advantage of those lightning strikes that Jay has talked about because they're not backed up against some communities. They're allowed to take a lightning strike and allow it to grow, allow it to burn, allow it to manage, and then continuously do that over the years where they're getting close to having a fire return interval that is pretty close to a natural return interval. And, you know, I've worked on that district for several years, and it got to the point where a fire would get called in, and either we know it's in an area where we don't have to rush to it, or we'd go out to it. And the first question is do we put this out or do we let this grow? Because the forest is in such a state where we know that, you know, we can have more beneficial fire there because over time we've gotten to that point with not suppressing so many fires out there. So you can do the no suppression thing, but it's only in limited places. And it's only if you're too far behind on the fuels treatments, it's a little bit too sketchy to do that. Just let it burn type of thing, or forest management through fire thinning.
Yeah, and we've had studies show that the best result, especially in those areas that are close enough to communities, is to thin the forest mechanically first, reduce that amount of fuel, then you introduce that fire, and that's the best result we get.
Okay. Right. So basically, we have to go back and fix what we've been doing for the last 100 years. Once we get there, we can get to a steady state, but it's going to require money to do it. And just for the folks on this Zoom, and then I've got a question for Marcus. I'm teeing him up. How much of what's in the forest can actually be put into productive things like wood pallets and 2x4s and things like that, and how much of it is just slash or rubbish?
I mean, from the industry side, you're going to get out of a tree that's 12 to 14 inches in diameter, you're going to get about 50% of that's going to go to a sawmill, 50% of that's going to go into a biomass pile that's what we call unmerchantable, the limbs, the top that just won't make anything, and all of that. And then once you get that mill, so you're taking a round log and you're turning it into a square board, you have sawmill residuals, so you have chips coming off of that. So probably when you get it all said and done, about 30 to 40% of that tree is going to turn into a square board, and the rest of it's going to be either residual or biomass.
That's super helpful to know, Jay. And what I want to just say is not that I'm trying to sell tickets to the next webinar, but our next webinar is going to basically focus on some of the new things that we see in industry that might take that 60% that you're talking about and turning it into a product, and that product can go someplace. And the reason products are important is those are the things that help Zach pay back the investors that he's got there, and we'll come back, Zach, and talk about the products. A couple questions about AI and modeling that are in the chat, and I'm sort of thinking the insurance industry is known for being very, very good at modeling risk and running models and things like that. Marcus, is there any hope there that we can use those things to help us?
Yeah, I think that's true. Now, I mean, part of the challenge is a lot of the companies that do a lot of the modeling for themselves do that in a proprietary manner. But I think what you're seeing now, because the impact of these wildfires are so broad on the industry, that you're seeing a lot more industry-wide collaborations. And I go back to, IBHS, the Institute for Business and Home Safety. And one of the things they do is they go in after a lot of these major wildfires and do a deep dive on what happened, what you could have done better, what are the root causes, all that kind of stuff, to help the industry better predict and better model. But when you do that, that's very valuable information for the local communities, and then for the public as a general. So I think you're going to see a lot more partnerships, and I think you're going to see a lot more sophisticated models that will be useful not just for insurance, but for broader purposes as well.
Oh, so you can use it not only to do your insurance risk, but also to do your fire risk and your water risk and things like that. So when Mark goes out and talks to a landowner about you should be doing these things, he'll have more tools available. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and then on a community-wide basis too. So I think you're going to see stuff on the micro level, individual homes. Then you're going to see stuff on a community-wide basis where you'll start to see a true assessment of, say, Flagstaff or Coconino County, what the risks are. And then you have also the weather / forest health, some of those other factors that can be used to predict how risky a certain area is. And then what the insurance industry basically does is then takes that, risk data, and in some cases they run models, over, like 100,000 times. I saw a presentation where they do predictive models, and then they put that information along with, what the potential insurable losses are, and that creates a lot of the premium models and things of that nature. And I think what you're going to see over the next number of years is those models are going to be much more targeted, much more sophisticated, and they're going to evolve because, you know, making that investment is a very good investment for insurance companies where 10, 20 years ago, investing in those, you know, very sophisticated models, the ROI wasn't as great as it is now because, you know, the magnitude of the fires was not as severe. And so that's where you're seeing the economics of it changing the investment patterns.
Right, right. So this whole idea of community integration and sort of getting people to talk together is interesting. And particularly, I know Mark was talking about building materials as being important. So if the insurance industry is saying these building materials will help you reduce risk, you know, then presumably that helps Mark and the fire department in Flagstaff go out and talk to communities about the things they need to do.
Well, and one of the things you're going to see, not to monopolize this, but is a lot of insurers will say, I'm not going to write homes that have wood roofs anymore.
Right.
You will either do, they're going to stop asking. Or if you want a premium at this level, you have to do it this way. You have to remove that wood fence, or you have to, you know, and the other thing you're seeing is insurers are now inspecting homes and properties, whether it's through satellites, whether it's through other techniques, at a much more aggressive level than you saw, partly because of technology, but partly, you know, that ROI was there because they really want to understand the risk.
Right, right. So Zach, in your work, what are, you know, everything I've heard basically says if capital markets could fix it, it would already be done. But what we need are public-private partnerships and ways of finding how to monetize the benefits so that they can actually help fund some of this. What are you seeing as leading edge, you know, when you think about how you can help these public-private partnerships get going? Because we're not going to get money out of the federal government, at least this year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you guys are freezing up a little bit for me, so if my video is not great, maybe I'll turn mine off just for a second. Yeah, I think that's a good point. We heard for the first 10 years of Blue Forest that there'd never be federal dollars, and then lo and behold, we had some IIJA and IRA funding for quite a few years that I think did make a big impact. But I think the overall point is right. Even if we got a big one-time infusion, it's not enough, and it's never going to be enough. So we think about who else benefits from these projects. These are all designed as multiple benefit projects. Sure, we want to reduce fire risk across the board here, but we also know we're protecting water resources. We're helping protect air quality. We're creating rural employment. We're creating better carbon sequestration, among other things, right? More durable, more stable carbon sequestration. So who benefits from that, and how do we bring something like that to the table? And actually, to your last question, Bill, a lot of the modeling work is not just insurance modeling. I would highlight companies like Vibrant Planet or Planscape that have tools that are helping communities actually plan projects, or utilities plan projects, or land managers plan projects that help them prioritize whatever is most important in their community. And then a lot of the work we do at Blue Forest is actually partnering with other academic groups that have developed models that help us understand ecosystem service benefits, or the positive benefits conferred by healthy forests. And we can, I'll take my video off again if I'm lagging a little bit. And then we can actually model out what those outcomes are going to be and ascribe those to different beneficiaries and then really engage with them. So I just wanted to call out beyond the insurance modeling that there are a couple other ways that modeling can be really effective for bringing folks together happen and at a larger scale.
Bill, to add into, just to kind of give people an idea of what kind of dollars are we talking about? So for a 2.4 million acre footprint of forest through IIJA and the funding from the federal over the last, since 2022 to 2024, so a 3-year period, they invested $171 million specifically for that landscape. by doing so, and we feel that it takes at least, now that we have kind of the base set up with that 171 million, it's going to take 40 million or so a year for the next several years to keep us at that pace and keep us moving, because we did the most acres we'd ever done based on these investments. But those federal investments brought in $188 million from industry. Actually, we're learning now it's closer to probably $250 million from industry. And it brought in about $54 million from partners like the City of Flagstaff, Coconino County Flood Control, SRP, Salt River Project, all these nonprofits. So it started to bring in other funding that allowed us then to get this work done. And that's how important it is for the federal government to be involved in this.
So, Jay, you're making a case that says the federal government can help seed fund it, and then local businesses and communities and others can then, you know, sort of chip into it. And this is where Zach is talking about how do you finance things, because it's like everything. Not everybody has $10,000 laying around, but you might have $100. If you can basically turn that into a loan that will start a project, and then you pay over time, which is what financing is really all about, then you can create these ecosystem benefits. Does anybody want to take a crack at the workforce development jobs issues that you know that we're talking about here? Because I mean, if we're going to double the amount of thinning, we got to find more people, right?
Yeah, we've kind of tiptoed into that a little bit, because we see the problem coming there. From the logging side, the first step of it all, you know, it's an aging workforce. It's, you know, people are retiring and not being replaced. To you know, we've got there's parts of the country or parts of the world in Sweden where people are running logging equipment from their basement with joysticks. I mean, that may be where we end up. You know, people don't want to be out in the woods in the hot, dusty, you know, dirty environment, but we can still get the work done. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of changes going on in that realm as well. But it takes diesel mechanics, it takes people that understand hydraulics, electrical, all these things have to be in place to get an industry to the point that it needs to be at.
Oh, that's really useful. Zach,
yeah, I would jump in here and say, well, I don't propose to have any of the solutions on the workforce development side. I think these organizations, Indian Youth Service Corps, Conservation Corps, definitely need our support more now than ever, if folks have seen some of the attacks on AmeriCorps and how that's going to impact funding. So federal funding is really important for these things, and advocating for that is important too. I would say on the technology side, there are companies, including one that we've invested in called BurnBot, that's trying to find ways to get things like fire on the ground more safely and more quickly and at some kind of scale. And again, this is probably more applicable to the oak savanna than ponderosa pine forest in certain cases. But the ability to burn and burn at scale is really important. To Jay's point, another company that we're looking at right now allows for teleoperation or remote control of skidders, masticators, other types of equipment like that. And I think those are going to be the force multipliers where technology can support. It doesn't replace, though, the need to train this workforce. We still need log truck drivers. We still need a handful of other things that are starting to age out. But if we can find places to insert some technology to give us some economies of scale or some benefit, I think it's a really important thing to be trying to do that alongside building up folks that actually do want to do this work and don't want to be in a basement somewhere, as Jay has called.
Jack, I'm glad you brought up the conservation course, because I just met with some conservation kids 2 weeks ago, and they had all their funding cut. And these are the kids that's the next generation of the loggers that are out there. That's the next generation of folks that are working out in the woods. And right now, you know, they're not getting paid a whole lot, but it's a benefit in the future. It's an investment in the future. So really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, so I would just say that if anybody is interested in some of these themes, like, you know, how do we find funding for Conservation Corps? Or what do we do in order to get, you know, sort of the government re-engaged? You know, just drop us a note and we're happy to try to help connect you. That's one of the things that we do here at Arizona State University in putting these things forward, because if people understand that there's a need, then it's easier to take action and you can see your action going someplace. We should probably talk really briefly about universities and their role, and that includes community colleges. What do you guys think? You know, from the insurance industry, let's start there and then let's work our way around.
Well, I think in the insurance industry, you're going to see a lot of growth in these type of forest management skilled positions, because as we continue to try to adapt to a changing climate, there's going to be a real need for that type of workforce in the insurance industry. And so I think that's going to be a real growth. You know, more and more insurance companies have you know, more sophisticated climate modelers and all that kind of resources. And you're even seeing that in other industries as well. I know that the local utilities here have hired, you know, more meteorologists and more folks really focused on how they can adapt as well. So I think that's going to be a huge growth area. And I think to the extent that universities and community colleges can start training, not just on the business side of insurance, but also on the climate, the forest health, the resiliency side, that's going to be a huge opportunity for employment and growth.
Oh, thanks for that. And then Jay, Mark, and what do you guys think?
At the Flagstaff Fire Department, we work really closely with NAU and CCC, ERI. We work closely with NAU on some of the social science and how we can get this message out to the public on home hardening and you know, resilient forests. What type of messages resonate best with folks? They do some surveys on some of our prescribed burns that we've done and how people are reacting to smoke and what their perceptions are around smoke. So that's an area that we work really closely with them. And then also just their students that are in the forestry department, getting them out on some prescribed burns and getting them some on the ground training with some of these treatments, where it's a little bit easier for them to come out and do it with us than it is with like a federal resource.
So a lot of interesting job opportunities locally for people who want to get outside, for people who want to run joysticks, for people who want to do modeling. Jay, I'm going to let you weigh in here, and then Zach, I'm going to let you bat cleanup here, and then we're going to wind things up.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest thing would be that loggers have told us it cost them $70,000 plus to train one equipment operator. They don't want to spend that money and then lose that person to somebody else, you know. So to have somebody that even comes in to apply for a skidder operator that has some experience, I mean, it means the world to these loggers to know. And so, you know, getting the community colleges involved, these trade schools that can look at training people, there's a handful or less of those across the country. And usually it's the equipment dealers, the John Deeres and the Caterpillars that kind of host these training periods because they want to sell their equipment along with the operator that's trained on that equipment. So, you know, that's where you see a lot of this in the southeast and the eastern part of the U.S. and it's starting to happen. And I look at the California's getting into it now, and Arizona's looked at it. How do we get these people involved and get young people to understand that this isn't your 1950s skidder. This is a highly technical $1 million piece of machinery that you're operating.
Great. Well, that sounds like jobs for communities where all these forests are. And Zach, we haven't talked about products and things like that, but you know, you're basically looking at how finance can help solve some of these problems. I presume you've got the need for sophisticated people to work this too.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about working out in the woods, you still need people to work in the mills and the wood products facilities as well too. And we don't have the workforce that we need, but in communities, you often have people that want these too. So I like the communications between conservation corps and the community colleges, which can be real, again, force multipliers to help folks there. I do think it is important to center a lot of this work at the community scale and make sure you have that social license for these projects, because when we think about bringing in investors, it's really important that we've reduced the risks. Is the community supportive of this mill or this wood products? Do they want to see this restoration project go forward? Things can be different in different states. California is vastly different than Arizona in a whole bunch of different ways. But the more of that social license that you can build around a community and around your projects, the less risk you're going to have connecting the dots between what comes off of that project and the wood products facility. And I know that that takes time, but one of the things we really focus on, especially for our investors, is if this is going to take a long time, how do we reduce that risk somewhat in engaging with those communities and working through local partners, knowing that we're not often going to be the local partner at Blue Forest. That's a really important way to deliver that work. Last thing I'd mention, a lot of what Jay talked about is small diameter logs. I'm thinking of, 2 of the 3 facilities that we've invested in are really targeted to be working between maybe 4 and 10 inch logs. On the input side, maybe average size is closer to 8. And that can be anything from fence board to post and poles to quite a few other products as well. And again, looking to find slightly higher value outcomes for that material than burning it to generate electricity or other things, which can be really viable too in certain settings.
So that sounds like an ecosystem. So Ed, I'm just going to say, I'm going to pass the baton over to you and just want to thank all the panelists for what you guys have done. There are a number of questions in the chat about, well, what do you do with the 60% that you can't use? I think, Zach, you gave us a thought, fence posts. We'll want to talk about biochar, renewable natural gas, e-methanol, and other things on our next webinar. So we'll look forward to seeing you all then. Ed, back to you.
Thank you, Bill. I have just a couple of comments before. What I'd like to do is just go around the horn for a final comment. What thought would you like to leave with the audience? Just 2 things. What Bill is doing at ASU is really looking at the whole ecosystem from development of the biomass, getting it into commercialization. And we're not talking about the commercial lumber that you get out, but what do you do with all of the tops of the trees? But to animate the market, you've got to get enough supply. You've got a way to get it over to the processes, and you have to have processes that can turn that biomass into something that's economic for it to move forward. And the last thing I want to mention is that climate change is not going in 2 directions. It's only going in one direction. So this is not going to get better. And the work that we're talking about here is just really critical, not just for the West, but wildfires are happening all over the country. So let me just say, let's go around the horn in the same order that we started. Just a few seconds of final thoughts to leave with people. So we'll start with Jay and then go to Mark, and then Marcus and Zach. And Bill, you're not off the hook either, because you're going to have to say something at the end too.
Thanks, Ed. I would leave it with, this isn't your grandfather's logging industry anymore. This isn't about timber barons. This is about people that are trying to improve the health of the forest through thinning of trees that really are sucking up water that we need. They're causing the fires that we don't want. And the only way we're going to deal with this problem is through private industry. And private industry only exists if they're making some kind of a profit or getting paid to do the work. So the next session that Bill's going to be bringing up is going to be as important. We have to find value in this wood, and these new technologies are what's going to do that.
Great. Mark?
I would just leave it as thinking outside the box on how to solve this problem with the excess wood, particularly the ponderosa pine that nobody wants. Some really great things have come out of the forest that sounded crazy a few years ago, like firewood. Just thinking about outside the box on what to do. I went to Sprouts the other day and I looked at their firewood that they're selling outside the door, and it's from Malaysia and Mexico. And I'm thinking, we live in the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world, and nobody wants this wood, and we're not selling it for firewood here. So there's solutions for that 60% out there. We just need some smart people to come up with the ideas.
Great. Marcus?
Well, I think the big thing's going to be the economics of this are going to continue to change, and the costs are going to continue to increase. And what that will create are new economic opportunities that may not have been viable many years ago, but because if you can reduce insurance or other risk costs or other infrastructure costs by being smart with your resources, that cost benefit, I think, is going to continue to evolve and kind of change toward being things that are harder to finance now are going to make a lot more sense because either the risk has increased so dramatically or other costs to enhance resiliency are even more expensive. And so I think that's going to be the future.
Zach, the second to final word.
Yeah, I'd say two things I'm hopeful. First, first off is the way technology and investors look at this space and think about solutions here. And I think that can certainly help drive some of these things forward here. And I think as we bring more folks in, going back and leaning into that idea really about community support, social license, and trying to build that from the ground up, that's what's going to make us most successful in the long run. The other thing I would mention is that doing this a lot, Obama, Trump 1, Biden, Trump 2, we haven't changed how we talk about things. We're still talking about resilience. And this is a bipartisan issue. And I think we have a lot of support across the board, no matter where you fall politically. And I speak to everybody in this room and say, let's try to use the power we have and really drive this issue forward.
Right. Wildfires are pretty colorblind.
Yep.
Bill, last word.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank you all for being part of today's conversation, both the panelists and all of you that have joined. It's been amazing. It's clear that building wildfire resistance is going to require stronger connections between our communities, better data, knowledge sharing, smarter financial and market structures. So let's take what we've learned today, work together, and turn these actions turn these insights into action. And I would say, if you could send us a note with your comments and thoughts. Look forward to the next webinar that we'll be doing. This will be a series. And if there's anybody who wants us to come talk in communities, we'll try to figure out how to do that. So thanks so much for listening, and so appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Bill. I'll be getting the full set of slides out after this session. And those people that had put a note in the chat that they would like a call back, we'll make sure that happens.
Okay.
Great. And I thank the audience for sticking with us right to the end. So thank you all, and hope to see you in the next webinar.